Was Sherman McMaster a ruthless outlaw riding with the Cowboys, or a fearless lawman secretly working to bring them down? His life is a tangle of mystery, betrayal, and redemption. McMaster crossed paths with legends like Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, but his true allegiance remains one of the Old West's most puzzling riddles. Was he a villain, a hero, or something in between? If you love uncovering the untold stories and shocking truths of the American frontier, hit subscribe and join us for more incredible tales from the Wild West. Sherman McMaster's life took him from the edge of the law to a role as a lawman, eventually becoming one of the 6 men who rode with Wyatt Earp during the famous Vendetta ride. Born in 1853 in Rock Island, Illinois, McMaster was the son of Sylvester W. McMaster. Details about his early years remain scarce, but what is known suggests an adventurous spirit that eventually drew him westward. McMaster relocated to Texas, where he joined the Texas Rangers, a force known for handling law enforcement across the frontier. During this time, he encountered Curly Bill Brocious, who was held under the watch of McMaster's division. In 1878, Curly Bill managed to escape custody, and some accounts hint that McMaster may have played a role in that incident, though this remains unproven and debated by historians. Not long afterward, McMaster associated with figures such as Brocious, Johnny Barnes, and Pony Deal, and together they moved on to Arkansas, signaling a turning point in his life. Life as an outlaw and gunfighter. In 1878, Sherman McMaster was serving with the Texas Rangers, the same year he reportedly met Curly Bill Brocious. Historical accounts suggest that McMaster had a solid reputation as a capable lawman and was admired for his skill and confidence. By mid-1880, however, McMaster's name appeared in connection with a few questionable incidents. In July of that year, he was suspected of taking U.S. Army mules and 2 horses from a military camp near Tombstone. Around the same time, he was also linked to a stagecoach robbery near Globe, Arizona. One particular event on February 24th, 1881, drew attention when 2 men held up a stage traveling between Globe and Florence. After discovering the Wells Fargo strongbox was empty, the robbers reportedly took U.S. mail instead. Authorities named Pony Deal, also known as Charles Ray, and McMaster as prime suspects. Despite these allegations, the situation was complicated. In Tombstone, City Marshal Virgil Earp knew there was an active warrant for McMaster. However, according to the Tombstone epitaph, Virgil was advised by Pima County Sheriff Bob Paul to delay any arrest until Deal was also in custody, suggesting a cautious approach by law enforcement. On September 10, 1881, an attempt to bring McMaster in reportedly failed when he avoided being taken into custody. Some later accounts claim this incident may have been misunderstood, as McMaster could have been working undercover for the Rangers at the time, aiming to infiltrate the outlaw Cowboys gang. By the time tensions escalated between the Earps and the Cowboys, McMaster had clearly aligned himself with the Earp faction. His loyalty shifted, and he became an important figure in the series of events that followed the gunfight at the OK Corral. Historians believe McMaster had previously known Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday from Dodge City, Kansas, which may have strengthened this alliance. During the Herp Vendetta ride, an effort to seek justice for the killing of Morgan Earp and the attack on Virgil Earp, McMaster stood alongside Wyatt Earp, Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, and Texas Jack Vermillion. His role in these events remains one of the most intriguing chapters in his complex life. Herp Vendetta ride. Wyatt deputizes posse. When U.S. Marshal Crawley Dake gave his approval by telegraph, Wyatt Earp acted quickly. He deputized several men to protect his family and pursue those responsible for the attacks. Among them were Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, Jack Turkey Creek Johnson, Charlie Hairlip Charlie Smith, Daniel Tip Tipton, and John Texas Jack Vermillion. Each man received $5 a day for their service, a respectable sum for the time. Sherman McMaster brought valuable experience to the group. He had previously served with the Texas Rangers between 1878 and 1879. during which his unit held Curly Bill Brocious in custody for 5 months. Despite his law enforcement background, McMaster had faced serious allegations in Tombstone, including accusations of taking U.S. Army mules and involvement in a stagecoach robbery with Charles Pony Deal. These charges were never fully proven, leaving questions about his past. What made McMaster particularly useful to Wyatt Earp was his deep familiarity with the Cowboys and his ability to speak Spanish, an advantage in a region with strong Mexican influence. He also had a well-known appreciation for fine horses, a detail often mentioned in accounts of his life. Jack Turkey Creek Johnson, whose real name was John William Blount, also had an interesting story. Originally from Missouri, Johnson grew up near Neosho in the state's lead mining region. In 1877, after being connected to a deadly street fight, Blount left Missouri and headed west. His troubles continued when his brother, Bud Blount, killed a man during a dispute in Tip Top, Arizona Territory, in May 1881. Bud was sentenced to Yuma Territorial Prison. In an effort to help his brother, John Blount adopted the alias Jack Johnson and sought out Wyatt Earp in Tombstone. Wyatt agreed to assist, even drafting a petition to Governor Fremont, with whom he had influence. The effort succeeded, and Bud Blount was eventually released. To repay Wyatt for his help, Johnson joined the Herpposi, cementing his place in one of the most storied chapters of the Old West. Charlie Smith had a long-standing relationship with the Earp family. His years in Texas, working in saloons, helped him become fluent in Spanish, a skill that proved valuable in the Southwest. While in Fort Worth, Smith became acquainted with James Earp, who worked as a barman there. Historical records note that Smith had been involved in a few serious altercations during his time in Texas, even sustaining a major injury in 1878. In 1879, Smith arrived in Tombstone with Robert J. Winders. Soon after, he formed close ties with the Earps. Winders partnered with the Earp brothers on the Mountain Maid mine, further strengthening these connections. Daniel Tipton entered the Tombstone scene in March 1881. His reputation was somewhat controversial, shaped during his early days in the mining boom of Virginia City, Nevada Territory. Before heading west, Tipton had served in the Union Navy during the Civil War and bore tattoos on his hands and forearms, marks of his seafaring years. After the war, he turned to mining and gambling, occupations common among men seeking fortune on the frontier. By 1879, Tipton was in Colorado's Gunnison district, later moving to Tombstone at the invitation of Lou Rickabaugh, a mutual friend of both Tipton and the Earps. Like Smith, Tipton earned his living through gambling and occasional mining ventures. John Texas Jack Vermillion added another layer of complexity to the Earp posse. Originally from Virginia, Vermillion joined the Vendetta ride following the death of Frank Stillwell. He was never formally charged in connection with Stillwell's killing, but he was present when Florentino Indian Charlie Cruz met his end. Although closer in friendship to Doc Holliday, a fellow Southerner, Vermillion stayed loyal to Wyatt Earp during critical moments, including the confrontation at Iron Springs. His background as a Confederate cavalryman under J.E.B. Stuart during the Civil War made him a skilled horseman and an expert with firearms, qualities that served him well in the unpredictable world of the Arizona Territory. In late January 1881, U.S. Marshal Crawley Dake visited Tombstone in the company of acting Governor John J. Gosper. At the time, law enforcement in Arizona faced a major challenge: the growing strength of the outlaw cowboys. Dake had already appealed to U.S. Attorney General Wayne McVeigh for additional funds to pursue these men, but his request had been denied. The reason for the refusal was financial. Dake's superiors insisted that he reduce his outstanding debt below the penalty bond of $20,000 before any new appropriations could be granted. This restriction left Dake in a difficult position, as local law enforcement resources were inadequate to confront the well-armed criminal element in the region. By September 1881, Governor Gosper was sounding alarms at the federal level. In a letter to Secretary of the Interior Samuel Kirkwood, Gosper described Arizona as having a small army of outlaws, fully capable of overpowering county authorities. This statement underscored the seriousness of the situation. Frustrated by the lack of federal funding, Dake sought an alternative. He borrowed $3,000 from Wells Fargo and Company, assuring them that the Department of Justice would reimburse the amount. Reports vary on how much was ultimately deposited into a Hudson and Company bank account. Sources cite either $300 or $3,000, minus a $15 deduction. These funds were earmarked for arresting those accused of federal crimes. The following day, John Thacker of Wells Fargo accompanied Wyatt Earp to the bank to confirm Wyatt's authority to use the funds for law enforcement purposes. Later, controversy emerged. Allegations surfaced that Dake had misused some of the borrowed money. Claims included spending $300 on personal entertainment and diverting other funds for improper purposes. However, Dake was never convicted of any wrongdoing, leaving the matter unsolved in the historical record. Outlaw cowboy warrants. In January 1882, Wyatt Earp obtained warrants from Judge William H. Stillwell to arrest those suspected of attacking Virgil Earp. Judge Stillwell was among several Cochise County citizens who had grown frustrated with Sheriff Johnny Bond's inability, or unwillingness, to curb the Cowboys' ongoing criminal activity. On January 17th, tensions flared when Johnny Ringo and Doc Holliday exchanged verbal threats in Tombstone. This confrontation led to both men being taken into custody by Police Chief James Flynn. Each paid a fine, but Judge Stillwell noted that Ringo still faced unresolved charges for a robbery in Gallyville. 3 days later, on January 20th, Ringo was rearrested and placed in jail. Meanwhile, Wyatt Earp organized a posse. On January 23rd, he rode out with his brothers Morgan and Warren, Doc Holliday, Texas, Jack Vermillion, and 4 additional men. Their destination was Charleston, Arizona, a stronghold for Ike Clanton, his brother Finn Clanton, and Pony Deal. Word of the warrants reached Ringo while he was still in jail. Determined to alert his friends, he arranged for bail. Sheriff Bean released him even before the payment officially arrived. Almost immediately, James Earp filed an affidavit declaring that Ringo was effectively an escaped prisoner and accusing him of planning to obstruct Wyatt's enforcement of the warrants. Ringo wasted no time. He rode toward Charleston to warn the Clantons and Deal of the posse's approach. During the journey, Wyatt's group was joined by about 30 additional riders from Tombstone, reinforcing their strength. Upon reaching Charleston, the posse encountered Ben Maynard, an associate of the Cowboys. They placed him under arrest and used him as a guide as they searched the town. Going door to door, the group attempted to locate the Clantons and Deal, but their targets had already fled after Ringo's warning. While the posse secured Charleston, Ringo was captured again. The following day, they expanded their search into the surrounding countryside and stopped at a camp known as Pick-em-Up near Tombstone. There, the situation became more complicated. A deputy sheriff from Tombstone arrived and served a warrant on Sherman McMaster, accusing him of taking 2 horses from the contention mine. The posse then returned to Tombstone, where McMaster posted bail. Afterward, he and Charlie Smith took lodging at the Cosmopolitan Hotel, a place favored by the Earps and their supporters. On January 30th, 1882, Ike and Finn Clanton surrendered to Wells Fargo agent Charlie Bartholomew and were placed in the Tombstone jail. Initially, the Clantons believed the warrants were for armed robbery, but they soon learned the actual charge was assault with intent to commit murder, specifically the ambush and shooting of Virgil Earp several weeks earlier. The trial took place on February the 2nd before Judge William Stillwell. During the proceedings, evidence included Ike Clanton's hat, which had been discovered at the crime scene. Sherman McMaster testified that he overheard Ike in Charleston later that night discussing the attack. According to McMaster, Ike expressed frustration upon learning Virgil had survived, allegedly remarking that he would have to finish the job. Despite this testimony, several witnesses came forward in Ike's defense. Charleston Constable George McKelvey, saloon owner J.B. Ayers, and 5 others stated that Ike had been in Charleston at the time of the shooting, making it impossible for him to have participated. With conflicting accounts and insufficient evidence, the charges were dismissed. Wyatt Earp later recalled a pointed remark from Judge Stillwell after the case. The judge reportedly told him, "You'll never clean up this crowd this way. Next time, you'd better leave your prisoners in the brush where alibis don't count." This comment reflected the deep frustration many felt about the difficulty of prosecuting outlaw gangs under the existing legal system. Meanwhile, Ike Clanton retaliated by filing murder charges in Contention, Arizona, against the Earps and Doc Holliday for the deaths of his brother Billy and the McClory brothers during the OK Corral fight. When no new evidence emerged, those charges were also dismissed. Financial strains soon weighed on Wyatt. On February 13, he mortgaged his home for $365, equivalent to nearly $12,000 today, to attorney James G. Howard. Wyatt was unable to repay the loan, and by 1884, the property was foreclosed. On February 17th, Wyatt organized another ride. His posse, armed and holding a warrant for Pony Deal, suspected in a stagecoach robbery the previous month, left Tombstone. The mission failed, and the group returned after a few days, only to hear growing rumors that the Cowboys were preparing further retaliation. Wyatt seeks revenge. After Morgan Earp's assassination, Wyatt Earp began searching for those responsible. What he did not know at first was that 3 of the men he suspected were already being held in Sheriff Johnny Behan's jail. Shortly after the coroner's inquest concluded, Frank Spence voluntarily surrendered and was placed under Behan's protection in the county jail. On the same day, 2 of Behan's deputies made separate arrests of other individuals. Deputy William Bell brought in Florentino Cruz, also known as Indian Charlie, from Charleston on charges of shooting a man in a local dispute. Meanwhile, Deputy Frank Hereford detained a man identified as John Doe Freeze. Despite these arrests, none of the suspects remained in custody for long. All were eventually released. When Wyatt Earp learned of these developments in the court's decision, his confidence in the legal system collapsed. From his perspective, the courts had once again failed to deliver justice. Frank Stillwell, for example, had previously been acquitted of 2 killings and a stage robbery, reinforcing Wyatt's belief that members of the Cowboy faction could act with impunity. Stillwell shooting in Tucson. On Sunday, March 19, 1882, the day after Morgan Earp was killed, Deputy U.S. Marshal Wyatt Earp began preparations to escort his wounded brother Virgil, Virgil's wife Allie, and Morgan's body to the rail station in Benson. From there, James Earp would accompany the family and Morgan's remains to Colton, California, where his wife and parents awaited for burial. Before leaving, Wyatt borrowed a 10-gauge double-barreled Spencer shotgun from Fred Dodge. The following day, Wyatt received word that Frank Stillwell, Ike Clanton, Hank Swilling, and another cowboy were in Tucson, allegedly watching incoming trains with the intent of attacking Virgil during the journey. Concerned for his brother's safety, Wyatt decided additional protection was necessary. Wyatt assembled a small group to assist him. Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, and Jack Turkey Creek Johnson joined the escort. They traveled first to Contention City, where they left their horses and secured an extra wagon. The party then continued by wagon to the Benson rail station and boarded the next train to Tucson. All were heavily armed with rifles or shotguns, except Virgil, who carried only a pistol. Nathan W. Wyatt, a passenger traveling from Ash Canyon, later recalled seeing the Earp party well prepared for trouble. He noted that McMaster wore 2 cartridge belts and that each man carried substantial firepower. When the group arrived in Tucson, they were met by Deputy U.S. Marshal Joseph W. Evans. Both Virgil and other witnesses later reported spotting Frank Stillwell, Ike Clanton, and several cowboys at the station. Virgil described the encounter to the San Francisco Examiner, stating, "Almost the first men we met on the platform there were Stillwell and his friends, armed to the teeth. They fell back into the crowd as soon as they saw I had an escort." Wyatt's group accompanied Virgil and Allie to Porter's Hotel for dinner, remaining watchful throughout. Marshal Evans later reported seeing Holliday leave 2 shotguns in the railroad station office before supper. After dining, the group returned to the train. Holliday retrieved his weapons, and Wyatt personally escorted Virgil and Allie aboard. As the train prepared to depart, a passenger alerted Virgil that men were hiding on a flat car near the engine. Wyatt also noticed movement and slipped down between the tracks to investigate. At approximately 7:15 p.m., as the train pulled out of the Tucson station, several gunshots rang out. Witness estimates range from 6 to 7 shots. The accounts that followed were conflicting. However, by the morning of March the 21st, Frank Stillwell's body was discovered near the tracks about 100 yards from Porter's Hotel. The coroner reported multiple wounds, and a local observer, George Hand, remarked that Stillwell appeared to have been struck several times at close range. News of the incident spread quickly. The Arizona Star condemned the act in harsh terms, describing it as an ambush carried out without warning. The coroner's jury in Tucson ultimately concluded that Stillwell had been killed by Wyatt and Warren Earp, along with Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, and Jack Johnson. Justice of the Peace. Charles Meyer issued warrants for their arrest. Herpposi pursues outlaw cowboys. On the morning of March 22, 1882, part of the Earp posse, Wyatt, Warren, Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, and Jack Turkey Creek Johnson, traveled roughly 10 miles east of Tombstone. Their destination was Pete Spence's ranch and woodcutting camp, located off the Chiricahua Road near the South Pass of the Dragoon Mountains. Theodore Judah, who was present at the camp that day, later provided an account of what happened. According to Judah, the Earp party arrived around 11 a.m. and asked about the whereabouts of Pete Spence and Florentino Indian Charlie Cruz. Judah informed them that Spence was in jail in Tombstone, but Cruz was nearby cutting wood. The posse then rode in the direction Judah indicated. A short time later, Judah reported hearing a series of gunshots. He estimated 10 or 12 in total. That evening, he searched for Cruz but found nothing. The next morning, Judah resumed his search and discovered Cruz's body, which had multiple wounds. Later accounts of the incident vary widely, and some appear to be based on legend rather than fact. One story claims that after identifying Cruz, the posse pursued him and exchanged gunfire before he was fatally injured. This version further suggests that Cruz admitted involvement in Morgan Earp's killing and implicated several others, including Frank Stillwell, Hank Swilling, Curly Bill Brocious, and Johnny Ringo. Wyatt Earp's own account adds another layer of controversy. He claimed that Cruz was given the opportunity to fight fairly, stating that he allowed him to keep his revolver and even draw first. According to Wyatt, he then shot Cruz in a single decisive moment. However, this version conflicts with physical evidence. Cruz reportedly had 2 major wounds, one to the head and another through his side, casting doubt on the notion of a formal duel. These discrepancies make it difficult for historians to separate fact from embellishment, leaving the true circumstances of Cruz's death uncertain. Gunfight with Curly Bill. On Friday, March 24, 1882, Wyatt Earp and his posse, which included Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Sherman McMaster, and Texas Jack Vermillion, left their campsite near the road between Contention and Drew Station. They rode west for about 12 miles toward a planned rendezvous point at a natural spring. The meeting was arranged so that Charlie Smith could deliver $1,000 from Tombstone, roughly 20 miles to the east. The springs were later identified by Wyatt Earp as Iron Springs. However, the Tombstone epitaph reported the location as Burley Springs, situated about 8 miles south of Tombstone and 4 miles east of Charleston in the Whetstone Mountains. The site was eventually renamed Mescal Springs, though some modern researchers believe the actual location may have been Cottonwood Springs. Its precise position remains a topic of debate among historians. As the posse approached the springs, Wyatt and Doc Holliday rode in front. They crested a small rise overlooking the water and were startled to see 9 cowboys already camped there. Among them were Curly Bill Brocious, Pony Deal, Johnny Barnes, Frank Patterson, Milt Hicks, Bill Johnson, Ed Lyle, and Johnny Lyle. The cowboys were preparing a meal only about 30 feet away, positioned slightly below the Lawman on an embankment. The situation was immediately dangerous for Wyatt's group. According to accounts, Curly Bill fired first with a shotgun at Wyatt from close range, but the shot missed. This was a striking turn of events. 18 months earlier, Wyatt had actually intervened to protect Curly Bill from a lynch mob after the killing of Marshal Fred White, even testifying in a way that spared him a murder conviction. What followed was a chaotic exchange. Wyatt dismounted, holding a 10-gauge double-barreled shotgun he had borrowed from Fred Dodge. The cowboys opened fire, forcing the lawmen into a desperate defense. During the initial volleys, Texas Jack Vermillion's horse was killed, pinning his leg and trapping his rifle under the fallen animal. Doc Holliday quickly pulled him free while McMaster and Johnson returned fire to hold off the cowboys. Wyatt stepped forward using his horse for cover and fired both barrels of his shotgun at Curly Bill. According to later reports, the shot struck Brocious with devastating effect, killing him instantly. The remaining cowboys scattered under heavy gunfire. Johnny Barnes was severely wounded, and Milt Hicks was hit in the arm during the retreat. Wyatt himself faced difficulty remounting his horse during the confusion. His cartridge belt had slipped down, hindering his movement. After a brief struggle, he managed to get into the saddle, and the posse withdrew from the springs after one of the most intense encounters of the Vendetta ride. On April 12, 1882, the Weekly Nugget reported that Wyatt Earp and his companions were camped in a canyon near the Sierra Bonita Ranch. The article claimed Wyatt even issued a public challenge to Sheriff Johnny Bean, daring him to come and find them. Between April 10th and April 14th, the group began moving east, leaving Arizona territory behind. Before their departure, they stopped briefly at Camp Grant, where Wyatt transferred ownership of some property to his sister. At Camp Grant, the posse encountered Colonel James Biddle, who informed them that arrest warrants had been issued. He explained that by law he would have to detain them. However, instead of making arrests, Biddle invited the men inside for a meal. After they finished eating, they discovered fresh horses waiting for them, courtesy of their sympathetic host, allowing them to continue their journey. The next day, the group resumed riding east. On April 15, 1882, they reached Silver City in the New Mexico Territory. There, they spent a night at the home of a trusted friend. The following day, they sold their horses and saddles and boarded a stagecoach bound for Deming. From Deming, they took the train to Albuquerque, where they remained for about 2 weeks. During their stay in Albuquerque, the Earps wanted to keep their presence quiet to avoid drawing unwanted attention from enemies or the press. They visited the offices of 2 local newspapers and successfully persuaded editors not to publish stories about their arrival. The death of Sherman McMaster. The circumstances surrounding Sherman McMaster's death remain uncertain and are the subject of conflicting reports. In a letter to his father, Will McLaury, brother of the slain McLaury brothers, claimed that McMaster was killed by members of the cowboy faction. This account reflects the deep animosity between the Cowboys and those aligned with the Earps, but it lacks independent verification. Wyatt Earp offered a very different version years later. In the manuscript prepared with John Flood, Wyatt stated that McMaster died in 1898 while serving as a soldier in the Philippines during the Spanish-American War. However, official military records do not include McMaster's name, casting doubt on this claim. A third account comes from legal documents. A probate record filed by McMaster's siblings in 1906 listed his death as having occurred in Colorado in 1892. This record is considered the most reliable source among historians, though the lack of detail leaves the exact circumstances a mystery. Sherman McMaster remains one of the most fascinating figures of the Old West, an enigma caught between 2 worlds. Was he truly an outlaw who walked away from a life of crime, or a lawman working in the shadows to bring order to chaos? History leaves us with more questions than answers, and perhaps that's what makes his story so enduring. One thing is certain, McMaster's name is forever linked to the legends of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and the Vendetta ride that changed the West. His mysterious death only adds to the intrigue surrounding his life. If you enjoyed uncovering the truth behind Sherman McMaster and want more incredible stories from the American Old West, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. There are plenty more legends, mysteries, and untold tales waiting to be explored.